Hello, everybody. I am Gideon Litchfield. I'm the Global Editorial Director of Wired, and thank you very much for joining us on this special series of Wired briefings brought to you by Porsche. My guest today is Jon Gray from the Bronx in New York City, the co-founder of Ghetto Gastro. And Ghetto Gastro it's a little hard to describe what Ghetto Gastro is, actually. The usual shorthand is that it is a food collective, but to me, that's a little bit like describing the Metropolitan Museum as an art gallery or James Bond's Aston Martin as a car. 3 years ago, Wired's Jason Parham profiled Ghetto Gastro, and here are some things that he wrote about it. He said, their ambitions go beyond the conventional song and dance of a mere catering firm, which they will tell you they are decidedly not. Together, they're helping to redefine the intersections of fashion, music, film, and visual art by using food as the spark to larger conversations around inclusion, race, and economic empowerment. A full-service Ghetto Gastro event takes on the vibe of an art installation as they oversee each small detail of the process, cooking the food, selecting DJs, designing the event space, having input on performers. They want to be on TV and in film. They want to expand into publishing with a line of cookbooks to sell merch and cookware, to host exhibitions, to build a state-of-the-art cultural hub in the South Bronx that functions as a test kitchen, media studio, gallery, commercial space, and educational facility for kids in the neighborhood. They have plans for a vegetable garden and a series of all-natural food lines. Jon, that is a lot of stuff. That was 3 years ago. How does Ghetto Gastro look today?
My eyes have always been bigger than my stomach. We have a couple of those things that we mentioned are definitely in the works right now. My partner Les is working at the Bruckner Garden with our friends from La Mirada, Carolina Savrata. So that's in the works. We had a space that we closed when the pandemic hit, just because, the landlord wasn't trying to really rock with us. So we figured, all right, let's like get some space where we have autonomy. So we're in the works on something. But it's funny you mentioned the Met when you were doing the analysis and the comparisons, because now I'm an artist in residence at the Met. So that's like a little coincidence. And some of the work I'm doing there coincides with the work that we want to do in the Bronx with Ghetto Gastro.
Yeah, and I also see that you did a guest curatorship with the Cooper Hewitt Museum. You collaborated with William Sonoma on a line of kitchenware. You partnered with Timberland on a kind of eco-friendly hiking boot. So you do all these things. Talk to us about how all of these different things you do, these different ways in which you manifest, how do they help the mission of Ghetto Gastro?
Well, I think a lot of our mission is just storytelling, right? And shedding light on underestimated groups and places and parts that people have long been overlooked, and also have different narratives when they think about spots like the Bronx. Like, so for instance, you mentioned the Timberland eco partnership. A lot of people don't know that the Bronx is the greenest borough in New York City. And where I live in the North Bronx is super green. So I just want to run today, like through the woods and like trails where I see deer and whatnot. So a lot of people just think of it as a concrete jungle, which it is, but we also have like elements of greenery, and nature is a big part of my life because I grew up around it. So yeah, just like storytelling. When we think about food, we use it as a vehicle to storytell, whether that's about using it for liberation and thinking about all different types of histories that we would like to change and futures that we'd like to create.
Right. So a theme of these conversations that we're holding is reinvention. And obviously you've reinvented yourself, and sounds like you're trying to reinvent the Bronx, or at least reinvent people's perception of the Bronx. So talk to me about that. How did you reinvent yourself, and how does storytelling play a role in reinvention?
Man, it's crazy. I've been through so many iterations of self, from being a student, right? Being a student athlete, dabbling in the streets, like hustling, selling drugs, to trying my hand at fashion, loving art and design, and then looking at what would really probably fulfill my path, and thinking about what would I do if it wasn't about commerce or capitalism or money. And I'm like, man, I really love food. So let me figure out how to make that a part of my life. And that's kind of how Ghetto Gastro, with that vision and growing up with like great chefs, and my partner is Pierre Les, that's how we manifested Ghetto Gastro. So it's always this constant auditing of, where we want to be going that leads to the projects.
Right. And I'll talk about some of the projects in a minute, but like in the big picture, what do you want Ghetto Gastro to have achieved, let's say 5 or even 10 years from now in terms of a social change? What
Yeah,
does
I
success
think,
look like?
yeah, I know you mentioned like thinking about changing people's perception of the Bronx. And for me, that's less important. It's more really thinking about people that like the Bronx for me represents a lot of different types of communities globally. Whether you're looking at favelas in Brazil, different wards in New Orleans and Houston, Shantytown, like the ghetto and spots where like people have been, like I said earlier, underestimated and there's been divestment from systemic oppression and all of these things. It's really about the people within these communities. Like, and for us to really see ourselves for what we are and thinking about the magic and the resilience and the magic that's within that resilience. And so that's really for me to tell those stories. And a lot of times it's like I'm speaking to myself versus if other people catch the drift, great. But it's really just thinking about the people within the community. And yeah, that's pretty much the vibes and the energy. And I hope that we're inspiring. And then also like putting real resources to work, like figuring out how to deploy capital in ways that capital and all the other types of resources in ways that could actually impact some tangible change.
Right. So let's talk about one of the things you're doing, gastronomical. You're launching this new line of food. So tell us about that and how does that achieve the goals that you're trying to get to?
Yeah, the big mission with gastronomical is like we want to build a platform for exploration of flavors that have long been untouched. So a lot of, I think some of the systemic things like a byproduct of systemic oppression is like people not knowing their history or knowing themselves. And especially when you have things like the transatlantic slave trade, so many histories have been forgotten and lost. So it's really about exploring those things. So with gastronomical, we want to have this tri-continental story around ingredients, right? So thinking about ingredients of the African diaspora, how those tie into ingredients in the Americas, like with the transport of people, and also looking at Asiatic ingredients and Asian, how all of these things come together. So that being said, like we also want to nourish the world. So thinking about how we could create healthier, and I say healthier with quote, because a lot of times people could prescribe what healthy or what nutritious is, but it really depends on individual needs. But we want to do whole foods, like things are like natural, lack preservatives and GMOs, but using ancestral ingredients from Africa, Asia, and the Americas.
So what are some examples of the products you're going to launch there?
So the first example is our wavy waffle, and the first flavor of the wavy waffle is ancestral roots, and we're using tiger nut flour, sorghum. A lot of people don't know tiger nut was first cultivated in like ancient Egypt, right? It's one of like the first crops to be cultivated in that way. We're using sorghum, which has a deep history of coming from Africa to the Americas, also through the transatlantic slave trade. Millet, we're using cassava, which originates in South America, but is widely used in West Africa, in Asia as a source of starch. So it's just bringing all of these things together and almost like hip hop. Like I'm from the Bronx, it's like sampling records. We're sampling flavors, sampling ingredients, and creating a new body of work with them.
Right. And so you're creating this thing, which is like the most American thing there is, waffle mix, but you're bringing its roots, you're bringing roots to it. You're creating the connection with all of these historical food sources from around the world, and connecting to the community. Now, this waffle mix is like $20 a packet, I think. Right? This is some high-end waffle mix here.
The culture's expensive, man. It's a lot of reparations need to be paid, starting with this waffle mix. And the goal was also looking at Aunt Jemima, right? And all of these racist tropes. So it's like, how do we create an anti-racist breakfast, right?
Okay.
So that's also a big part of the story. And you see like whoever owns Aunt Jemima, they went through, like after the skit on Saturday Night Live, they went through a rebranding. But yeah, like you look at Uncle Ben's Aunt Jemima, and then you just look at American history and the way products have been marketed. And there's been a lot of harmful imagery and oppressive imagery around food. Like, so we're also working to uncover and just like, we don't want a seat at the table. We want to break the table and build a new one, you know, where everybody has equity.
So when you market something like this, obviously the people who are going to buy it are people with money. And how are you connecting, therefore? So you're telling those people the stories that you want them to, that you think are important to tell about the origins of this food and about racism and how it's been entrenched in the food industry. But how does that connect to then the underprivileged communities that you want to help? How does selling expensive waffle mix to rich people help those communities?
I'm basically using the same tricks we've always been using with Ghetto Gastro, right? Like, it's like Robin Hood, right? We're building the resources, and a lot of our cost isn't just to price something expensive. It's like we're figuring out this supply chain thing, like with COVID, ingredients are more expensive, like freight is more expensive. So we don't have the privilege to build a business and lose money just to get velocity. So we're working to like build it. The goal is definitely to make it scalable to where it could be in the local spots. I'll just name a few spots in the Bronx, like Seatown, Associated, and compete with the other products that are in that range. But at the moment, we don't have the economies of scale to do that. But the stories are for everybody.
Right.
You know, the stories are for everybody. Like, everybody the purchasing a waffle mix might not be for everybody, but the stories are. Similar to book Ghetto Gastro for an event is upwards of 200,000, you know? And how many people get to experience that? 40, 50, maybe 100 people. So like, the storytelling is infinitely scalable though, you know? So.
Right. And then, so the money that you get from events like that, you put back into communities or also into developing new business lines?
All of the things, like
right.
So I won't say that I'm an activist. I'm definitely an entrepreneur that's about doing business, but doing business in a different way, right? Where it's really about people and mutual aid. So whether we're connecting the dots with our clients to put a bunch of money to feed people in the Bronx, or we're putting that revenue if we're writing a check ourselves, really that was a big inspiration to build Gastronomical. We're like, all right, the world needs better billionaires. Like, so instead of having to call them up and ask them for permission and convince them, like, you should worry about the impact that COVID is having in the Bronx and the underlying conditions that are definitely there by design. When you look at the asthma rates, the diabetes, a lot of that has to do with redlining, environmental racism, and all of these things, like food deserts, what we call a food apartheid, because they're not like a natural occurrence. It's definitely an engineered thing. So instead of us having to convince people to care about these things and care about communities that we reside in and care about deeply, we're like, let's just become those people that could do that. So that's the goal. But all the time, like, you know, we're definitely about supporting organizations. Even with our Beats by Dre headphone that we just dropped, you know, we worked with Sweet Freedom Farm, which they grow food in Hudson. You know, it's not like super scalable, but they feed incarcerated folks, and they provide transportation from their families to get to visit the incarcerated, and with fresh food. So they're all about like liberation, like anti-incarceration, like just breaking down the system. So providing a platform and capital for those folks is what we're about, because they're the ones really doing the work, right? Like, I don't wake up every day. That's not like my burning thing. I'm like, all right, how do we do cool shit that has a real good impact? That's like what I think about. But it's really people that have dedicated their lives to particular problems. So I want to just make sure we can help route the resources to those folks, you know, the real heroes.
Because what you're alluding to there is like that there is a problem here there are problems here that are systemic. The poor nutrition in a lot of these communities is because, as you said, it's of systemic racism, it's like structural inequality, it's redlining, it's the way that the incentives of the food industry are structured, that unhealthy food is cheaper in the US than healthy food. I mean, these are some big problems. And
soy, corn, right? Like,
so how do you think, Right. So how do you think about these kind of really big systemic things? How does one go about tackling those?
Whew. See, when you ask questions like this, it makes me question my decisions. Like, damn, right? Did I do the right thing? But I think really just talking about it and using the privilege of a platform and influence, and like also making it to where it's like people can relate, it's relatable and it's cool. Because sometimes when people, I always equate it to like the person that was successful in the hood and comes back to the school and does a speech for the kids at school. If a person had on a suit and tie, I wasn't really relating to that person because I didn't see people like that on a daily basis. But if someone came and they spoke in the same vernacular I spoke in, they liked the things I liked and they had been through some of the things that I've been through, I'm tipping my ear a little bit more. So I think, because this is like policy, I don't know how many waffles I could sell to change the lobbyists and the policy and the way big food, big pharma operate. Because it's all a system, right? The more people get sick, the more the pharmacies make, the more it's just like this whole cyclical pattern of destruction. But you mentioned a good thing, like even the incentives for farmers, right? They're incentivized to grow corn, like for ethanol, even like corn that's not edible, right? Like they're getting all of these breaks for ethanol, soy, like animal feed, like feed for livestock. Like it's a reason why Frito-Lay can sell potato chips for so cheap, because it's so cheap to make, because they get the raw goods. So it's a big issue, and I would like to get with a lot of people that are smarter than me to help work on it. But I think as we're becoming more enlightened and more informed, like people are watching the documentaries, people are doing the work, people are starting to think about what's going into their bodies and how it affects their health and the health of their community and the environment. I think I'm hopeful that we can make some substantial change.
Yeah. So, this conversation is making me think a bit about a story that we ran on Wired a few days ago. And it was about the money, about $1 billion or so, that big tech firms pledged to basically to Black communities after the George Floyd riots last year, the protests. And, Netflix, for example, pledged to put 2% of its cash into financial institutions that predominantly lend to Black-owned businesses. And then the story we ran said, okay, so there's this money, but ultimately it asked who is really benefiting the most from this exchange, because 150 million or even $1 billion, it can go a long way in a community, but it's still really small. It's peanuts for some of these big tech firms, and it's also peanuts in the larger scheme of structural inequality and systemic racism. But it buys these companies a lot of good publicity and goodwill. Right?
I was going to say it's a lot of times it's PR, and like right. and even like I'll use myself as an example, right? Like people try to pick tokens and like representatives. Like I don't represent a community, right? Because it's a blurry thing. Like everybody doesn't have the same needs, the same wants, or the same ideas. And even when I think about what we want to do, like I don't know if it was Fannie Lou Hamer said, like, you don't organize for people, you organize with people. So I just want to be a listener. And when I get relate and when I get help and when I get add value, I want to do that, but I don't speak for every resident of the Bronx or every Black person, because my life experiences are different. So there's a certain blurriness in Blackness, where it's not a monolithic experience. And then like what happens with corporations, they pick people. You can almost look at the art world, like where before maybe the last decade, there were like certain stars, like I say everybody gets a brownstone, right? They get a brownstone, they live well, but it doesn't necessarily trickle down because the trickle down thing is a myth, right? Like there really has to be like this thing got messed up through systems, so there has to be systemic change. And like, yes, you said, these corporations, tech firms that are like making, like it's great, it's in good faith, they get the good press, some people benefit, but it's also going to have to be like the powers that be that really make it
so do you not worry about Ghetto Gastro being used in that way? Because you're kind of serving that purpose for these corporations.
I'm not the intention police. So it's like when people, I can't really ever police or know or care what people's intentions are by working with me. Cause people could spin a good story. Like I come from the street. So like my nose for the BS is very good. And people could spin a story and like you said, a lot of people started to care more after June of 2020, right? And I'm sure my brothers and sisters in the Asian communities probably feel the same, right? Like with like it's always going to be the topic or the thing to support that's of the moment, so you get like feel good about yourself and like get the good PR. Because one thing that has changed, consumers do care what corporations are doing. Where in the past it's like corporations were just looked at as corporations and nobody really, business was business. But now it's like, all right, what do you stand for? Like where are you investing in private prisons? Like what's your balance sheet look like? Are you using labor of incarcerated people? So people are digging into that more. But for me, it's like I could just control my intentions and who I support, right?
Right. Okay.
So as long as I'm getting the bag and making sure I'm like doing what I feel is right, you know, and you can't make everybody happy. Like we're all gonna have critics, and I lean into that because for me, like coming from the life that I came from and the life that I was living, everything is a lot better than what it was. And I'm not and I know I'm not going to please everybody, and I'm not afraid to not to.
Right. Good. Okay, I'm going to go through to some questions from the audience. So one of them is actually kind of related to a question I wanted to ask you, because I was thinking you do so many different things, and how do you choose which ones to do, and how do you avoid getting spread too thin? But the question that this person in the audience is asking is a bit more specific version of that, which was something like the Beats by Dre partnership. How does an idea like that come about, and how do you decide this is worth doing?
Well, that particular relationship, we have been working with Beats like for a few years. So a lot of it is just like friendships, like friends that work within these corporations, and like we'll do projects. So we did, we had this project called Sound Bites, and we did a dinner in Paris with Undefeated. Then we did another one in Hong Kong during Art Basel out there. That was crazy. So it just like made sense. It's like dating. Like you hang out a bit, you see if you like each other, and then you go deeper. And it was just organic. And because we stand what we stand for, and we were able to be like, yo, look, this is the story that we want to tell. Like from the photographer, Black woman photographer, Maisha Yvonne Gardner, like the whole crew on set were like mostly young Black people, probably like 95%. And everybody on set, like from the makeup today, they're like, wow, like this set. So even just the behind the scenes, like thinking about where the resources are going. So if we have any control over what communities and what households resources go to, we definitely try to direct that. So yeah, and it was just fun. Like we were able to make a cool design, you know, make some impact, move some money around, play Robin Hood a bit, and do some, like for me, also being from the hood and still living in the hood, it's not all about the altruism and the give back. It got to be dope, like, because everybody has aspirations, and especially like the culture is a visual culture. It's about being fly and feeling fly and feeling good. So everything has to feel dope. And I think that what we've achieved is being able to do like the quote unquote dope, cool, luxuries things, the aspirational things, but make sure it has concrete meaning. And we're not apologetic about the Blackness, right? A lot of people were afraid to be pro-Black before June 2020, before it became cool. We've been doing that, you know, and I think us staying true to that, even when it was unpopular, and it's cost us a lot of money and a lot of opportunities, right? Because they're like, oh, it's radical, it's not safe. Like these guys are street dudes, and they're not afraid. They're on the TED stage talking about their street exploits. So, but yeah, now I think perseverance and staying true is the most important thing to do. Yeah. And just being of service, like using your platform to be of service. Because I think we all want to leave this thing better than we came into it, right?
Yeah. Talking about the dope stuff, I mean, when we were speaking yesterday and preparing for this call, you said this was also about doing the fly shit. And because I'm an Englishman, I had to ask you what that meant. So, so talk to us about some of that. Like, what's some of the most fun things that you think you've done?
Ah, man. we took over, we did a project in France with Cartier called the Bronx Brasserie, where we took over this section of the Place Vendôme and kind of did half of it like an old school brasserie and half of it like new school Bronx like feeling. And that was just dope. We did it for 4 days. And me growing up, like looking at French gangster films, especially for inspiration when I was doing fashion, like in the Cirque Rouge, where they like did the heist in Place Vendôme, it just all felt really good. And then a lot of the stuff we do with like Michelle Lamy and Rick Owens, we just did a project with Nike at Family Style Festival in partnership with USM. So we built like this crazy kiosk with USM that we've been traveling pretty much around the world. We've done New York, we've done LA, and then we're probably gonna do Design Miami. Not probably, we will do, but just like taking these objects, like people look at USM, they think about like heritage Swiss, modular, utility. They don't necessarily think about Black and brown kids from the Bronx disrupting these structures, right? So just being able to like have an appreciation for different things and kind of, like I say, it's the hip hop model, sample bits and pieces that we like from cultures around the world to create our own language.
Yeah, something else that you did that I saw that I thought just looked a lot of fun was I think it was called the Black Power waffles, which were waffles with gold leaf dripped on them, right?
And that also inspired, because we started, like Ghetto Gastro kind of started catching people's ears after we did the Waffles and Models Party, like in 2013 for Fashion Week. So waffles are like a really big part of our story. And then our friend Liz Barclay, we did that project for Cook Inc. Like we were just developing like these waffles. And even when you look at Gastronomical and the wavy waffle, so we started with the chocolate waffle, which is the Black Power waffle, but then we have red velvet, because it's really about red, black, and green. So we have the Pan-African colors of solidarity as our first set of SKUs. So we have the ancestral roots, then we have the red velvet, which is the red, toasted matcha, the green, and then the chocolate for the black. So you're getting like that Roy Ayers, red, black, and green, Black Power, Pan-African vibe through the flavors. And that's like subversive, you know?
All right, some more questions from the audience. A couple of different people are asking, basically, do you have any words of wisdom for someone starting their own business, or especially someone looking to quit their corporate job and start their own business like yours?
I would say, make sure you have the stomach for risk and some insecurity. And like everybody's life isn't the same. Like if you have 3 kids and a family, like you might not be able to take the same risk as like someone straight out of college with no responsibilities, or even me, like I don't have children. So I could take a lot of risks, and my partners do, so I even have to negotiate that. But I mentioned earlier, perseverance, like be willing to try and take a couple of swings, right? And you know, being a non-conformist, those are the folks that change the world. So try some things, stay persistent, and just keep at it. It's really a test of will. Like I've been hustling. I've been doing business since I was packing bags at the grocery store when I was 10 years old, and I haven't stopped since. So it's really about just going, just keep going. And don't be afraid to work laterally, like work with the people next to you. A lot of times, and even I was doing this early on, you like look at the aspirational people that you want to mentor you, or you think you have to get advice from everybody that like has been successful or reached a certain level of material success that you want to reach. But honestly, when you work with the community next to you and you all uplift each other, it's so sweet when you're looking, like I look at my buddy Joshua Woods, he just shot the Gucci Centennial campaign. And this is a kid from Harlem, grew up in the hood, like me, like went to Cal, took different routes, but like we came up together. Like he was sleeping on the floor when we were traveling to London, doing Ghetto Gastro gigs, taking the pictures. Like, so it's like being able to just all of us glow up together is just like super dope, and to have those memories and to be able to recollect. And just also think about what success means to you. What you'll probably find is not a dollar amount, right? Because a lot of times you might achieve certain goals and material things that you think that when you achieve them, it will fill whatever vacant hole you have inside of yourself, but then you might reach that goal and just feel empty. So really take inventory and do the self-work, like do the meditation, do whatever you need to do to have that mindfulness while you go on this journey.
Right. And another couple of questions that are maybe kind of related to that, which is someone's asking, how do you stay creative? Someone else asking, how do you stay motivated? I guess I would put both those questions in the context of, especially as you grow and you get more successful and there's more pressure on you to just deliver, how do you keep that freshness and excitement and motivation and not feel like you're just under pressure all the time?
Honestly, like meditation really helps me because I deal with anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. And like, I didn't even know I was anxious because like when I was in the streets, like you're always on the edge. I just thought that was what to do and how to be. But then now I'm like, wait, it's not normal to just have a high heart rate all the time. Like you shouldn't always have to breathe hard and feel. So I think being mindful really helps me, and just being able to, like I get now like when after I meditate and I go on a walk, I see a leaf, how the sun reflects off a leaf, and that sparks creativity, right? Just being outside, like now being able to be around people safely. Like what I missed during the pandemic, I realized was just creative combustion. Like just seeing someone that you haven't seen in a while, not like on a scheduled Zoom to talk about a particular topic, like just being out in the world and just having a random conversation sparks. That's how I get my sparks. It's like, oh, there's some magic there. So,
right.
So I think just being open to receive and just staying curious, because there's something everywhere, you know.
You're inspiring me to restart my meditation practice. I started during the pandemic, and then of course I dropped it. What is another question?
I picked it back up today after not doing it for a couple of weeks.
All right, maybe we'll do a meditation pact. Okay, another question. Someone is asking, is there a way to get involved and volunteer with Ghetto Gastro?
At the moment, not right now, because like I feel like the only real, well, I will point you to some organizations to get involved with that we work with. Rethink Food. This is out of New York, but they're also working on some stuff in Chicago, New Orleans, and San Francisco. So Rethink Food is one organization to check out. I'll also say, check out Sky High Farm up in Hudson. And I don't know where the person asking this question is located, but on the Ghetto Gastro side, we'll have some more things, especially once we get the space. And once the garden gets going, like back in the Bronx, like the harvest is happening now and is going to kind of be dormant for the winter. But I feel like next spring, next summer, we'll have a lot of activities in the Bronx that we'll need hands for. So stay tuned,
all right.
please.
Cool, thank you. Another question from the audience. Who do you think of as your competitors?
You know what? I feel like I'm gonna be sounding like real guru-like, but I feel like we don't have any competition, only because what we built with Ghetto Gastro is so singular, but it's also just like, it's enough room for everybody to eat. And I think that mindset of competition and this mindset of scarcity isn't helpful. And granted, I've like been able to tap into competition, and sometimes I still do, to really motivate me and drive, but that's like driving the ego, and that's also not really a sustainable motivational force. I think being dedicated, determined, and having discipline, and also just understanding that there's abundance and there's a space for us to all exist and thrive. I think that's the mindset. Saying that I don't want to build a multi-billion-dollar company, but I don't see any competition.
Right. So if you don't want to build a multi-billion-dollar company, what do you want it to look like?
Oh, I said not saying that I don't. I do.
Oh, I see. You do. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. I would like to. You know, like I said, the world needs some better billionaires, and who better to become them?
Right. Okay. Someone else is asking, and I don't know, maybe you already do this. They're asking, I'm curious if you've explored or considered going fully plant-based at Ghetto Gastro.
Most of what we cook and what we show on Ghetto Gastro is plant-based. I'll probably say about 80, 90%. And that's mainly, not to say I only eat plant-based. I do lead a mostly plant-based diet. But if I'm in Japan, don't get it twisted. I'm gonna have some sashimi and I'm gonna have some wagyu, because that's that. But I think it's about moderation and being mindful of where things come from. The products that we're making at Gastronomical so far, 100% plant-based. The waffles plant-based, gluten-free. Just add water. So we're definitely trying to push the plant-based narrative, just to show that it can be a delicious way to eat and nutritious and satiating. Because often, especially in America and American diet and American plate, it's always about like the meat is the star and then everything else is like a supporting cast, but we want to kind of flip the plate to where the plants could be the star.
Yeah. Another one from the audience is asking, who pays for the organization of your events all over the world? I mean, is it always corporate sponsors, or do you get NGOs or, I don't know, the UN or anybody else like that?
To date, it's always been corporations, or we bankroll it ourselves. Like a lot of what we did in the beginning, before we were able to demand what we demand now, was like, all right, yo, let's just go explore. Like, let's travel to Paris. Let's go to Copenhagen. Let's learn and build these relationships. And just also saying no so much that people are like, oh man, all right, if we have to make them an offer they can't refuse, to say yes. So to date, it's been powered by mostly clients and corporations, but we had to pivot our whole thing because since the pandemic hit, there haven't been any events, right? So that forced us to get creative and think about, all right, what does the next 3 to 5, 10 years look like? And which is also why we created Gastronomical, like thinking about how do we scale without having to physically be present in a place.
All right, I'm going to finish on one final question, since we have a couple of minutes, only 1 or 2 minutes left. What do you think you found the hardest about doing all of this?
I think the hardest thing is just, self-mastery and getting through the doubt. Like it's just self-mastery, because at the end of the day, our only competition and our only obstacle is like ourselves. And of course, like I said, I'm a Black man in America. There are very real structural forces at work that are working to make sure I don't succeed. And that's been for 400, 500 years in the Western world. So that's real. That's a real thing for me. But a lot of times it's just self-mastery and staying motivated, staying connected, communicating with the team, making sure we're all building, we're all aligned. Because at the end of the day, if it's not about mutual aid, what is it about?
Great. Yeah. Well, okay. We are out of time, but Jon, thank you so much for joining us. This was fascinating and inspiring. And thank you to all of you who are watching for joining us. Thank you to our event sponsor, Porsche, and tune in for the next Wired Conversation. Thanks very much.